60, divorced, now what? Have you ever imagined starting over at 60? My name is Linda. I used to believe that after more than 35 years of marriage, we'd retire together, live peacefully surrounded by our grandchildren, and watch the sunset from our porch. But life rarely unfolds the way we imagine. At 60, we got divorced. There was no betrayal, no explosive fights, just a silence that stretched on for years, a distance neither of us bothered to close. One morning, over cold coffee and a quiet stare, he said, "Maybe it's time we stop this." I didn't cry. Strangely, I didn't even feel pain, just exhaustion. A deep, dull weariness that had built up through all those years when no one was really trying anymore. Getting divorced at 60 isn't like getting divorced at 30. You're not young enough to start over easily, and you don't have much time left to make mistakes and fix them. The questions came rushing in. Where will I live? How will we split retirement savings? How do I survive alone without being crushed by financial fear? I used to believe we had our retirement plan figured out, but I was wrong. We had just enough saved to live comfortably together, but after the divorce, everything was split down the middle. Suddenly, I found myself counting every dollar while also trying to learn how to fall asleep alone after 30 years of sharing a bed. I didn't know where to begin, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life drowning in regret, fear, or dependency. I moved out of the house I had lived in for most of my life. Not because I wanted to, but because it was too big, too empty, and too full of memories. I rented a small apartment in a northern suburb of Houston, about a 40-minute drive from the old place. There were no rose bushes I once tended, no familiar neighbors, no morning teapot sounds. Just me and the television, humming in the background to fill the silence. Money became a constant worry. After the asset split, I was left with about $85,000 in my retirement account and $20,000 in personal savings. My expected Social Security benefit was $1,100 a month, barely enough to cover basic expenses if the cost of living kept rising. I had no debt, but I didn't have much room for error either. I had never been the one to manage our finances. My husband had handled investments, insurance, and taxes. I took care of the house, the meals, and the small details that made up a family's everyday life. Now, staring down a financial world I barely understood, I felt like a child learning everything from scratch, except time wasn't on my side. Most of my friends, people my age, were traveling, babysitting their grandkids, or planning their retirement. And me? I was planning survival. I felt like I had fallen behind, like I'd missed a crucial class called Life After 60. I started tracking every single expense, learning how to use Excel, and researching safe short-term investments. There were nights I spent hours staring at my computer, just trying to understand basic concepts like compound interest. And sometimes I thought, I wish I'd started this sooner. But the past can't be changed, only the present, and the decision to live differently remains ahead. People often think divorce happens because of something dramatic, cheating, abuse, or endless fights. But sometimes it ends because of the quiet things. The small, slow unraveling. We never really talked about retirement or money in our later years. Maybe a few vague comments like, "We'll travel to Europe then," or "We should be fine. Our 401k looks pretty good." We lived life on autopilot. I cooked dinner. He managed the investment accounts. I decorated the house. He handled the taxes. It seemed like we were dividing responsibilities just fine, but in truth, we lived parallel lives with no intersection on the things that really mattered: values, dreams for growing old, and what I only realized too late, emotional intimacy. I can't remember when we stopped having deep conversations. All that remained were the logistical questions. What's for dinner? Did you pay the electric bill? I'm going to bed. Life turned into a routine so hollow. It felt like two people co-renting a life with no shared memories. And maybe the most dangerous part was, we thought that was normal. It's like finances. We thought having money in the account meant we were fine. We never reviewed it, never updated the plan, never truly talked it through. When everything fell apart, I finally understood. Neglect is a very expensive mistake. We didn't share emotions. We didn't share goals. And in the end, we couldn't even share a future. Divorce was the outcome, not the cause. Just like my financial crisis, it was the result of decades spent living without truly knowing what I wanted or needed. I'm not angry at him. I'm sad with myself for not asking sooner, for not speaking up, and for not making a plan for my own life. One cold morning in early winter, I woke up earlier than usual. The wind whistled through the cracks in the old apartment windows, and I shivered. I made a cup of coffee and sat quietly, watching the pale morning light slip into the room. No alarm. No one asking what I wanted for breakfast. No one saying, "Have a good day, hon." I felt like a blank page, but not in a refreshing way. In a lonely, emptied-out kind of way. I grabbed a small yellow sticky note, the kind I used to leave on the fridge to remind him to buy milk or take out the trash. But today, I wrote something different. Just one sentence. What do I want from the next 20 years? I stared at that question for almost half an hour. And then, for the first time in a long time, I began to answer honestly. I want financial freedom, not wealth. Just enough to live without fear. I want to feel valuable, even if I no longer work a 9 to 5 job. I want to feel loved, or at least connected. I want to learn something new, something I once thought I couldn't do. That tiny piece of paper became the first map for my new life. I stuck it to the bathroom mirror, so every morning I would look at it and ask myself, did I get a little closer today? I don't think about going back anymore. Now I ask myself, if life gives me 20 more years, how do I want to live them? The divorce felt like it had taken everything from me, but oddly enough, it was also the moment I began to reclaim something I hadn't realized I'd lost, myself. A version of me I had long forgotten beneath years of responsibilities and routine. Once I asked myself the question, what do I want for the next 20 years? I realized, if I wanted a new life, I had to start doing things I'd never done before, even the smallest things. I started with my finances. I printed out all my bank statements and used a red pen to highlight unnecessary expenses, my daily to-go coffee, a gym membership I never used, impulse purchases made out of loneliness. To my surprise, I was spending nearly $300 a month on things that brought me nothing but fleeting comfort. I opened an Excel spreadsheet, even though I'd always told myself I'm not good with computers, and began logging every bit of income and every single expense. I set a goal to save at least 25% of whatever I had each month, no matter how small the amount. Next, I started learning. Not to go back to full-time work, but to understand and take control of my life. I signed up for a free online course called Personal Finance for Beginners. It lasted 6 weeks, 2 hours a week. The first time I heard about emergency funds, the S&P 500, or the 50-30-20 rule, I felt like I had entered a whole new world. And strangely enough, I liked it. I liked learning, understanding, owning the knowledge instead of relying on someone else for it. At the same time, I started building new habits. Each morning, I walked for 30 minutes around the neighborhood, breathing deeply and letting my mind wander. Each night, I turned off my phone early and read before bed instead of scrolling through social media, watching other people's perfect lives. I also began reconnecting with people. I joined a support group for single women over 50, where we talked about divorce, widowhood, feeling lost, and finding our way again. In those conversations, I felt less alone. I began to understand I wasn't the only one starting over, and that was a powerful comfort. Gradually, my days stopped feeling heavy. They were still simple, but they had structure. I no longer felt like a victim of circumstance, but someone writing a new chapter. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was moving, and every day, I was one step further along. 3 months into my journey, I checked my bank account, and for the first time since the divorce, I smiled. I had saved over $2,400. Not a lot for some people. But for me, it was proof. I could take control of my life, $1 at a time, one decision at a time. I no longer felt adrift in a sea of bills and fear. I felt grounded, not because I had more money, but because I finally knew how to use it wisely. I opened a high-yield savings account, then a small investment account using a beginner-friendly app. I set up an automatic transfer of $250 a month into that account, my way of paying myself first, just like the course taught me. At the same time, I tried taking on some online side gigs, writing simple content for small websites, doing surveys, proofreading. Things I once thought were not for someone like me ended up bringing in a few $100s a month. More than the money, it gave me something else, a sense of worth, of still being able to contribute. On the emotional side, the biggest thing I realized was I was healing. I no longer woke up with that hollow feeling. Morning walks weren't just to kill time anymore, they were nourishment. I started noticing the quiet beauty in small things again. A warm cup of tea, soft sunlight through the blinds, a thank you email from a client. Each small moment added up, slowly filling me with a new kind of energy. People in my support group even said I looked different. Maybe because I smiled more. Or maybe because I had begun to forgive, not just my ex-husband, but myself, for staying silent too long, for putting myself last. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making coffee, listening to an old song, when a quiet thought came to me. I'm not afraid of the future anymore. It wasn't excitement or big dreams, just lightness. Just enough to breathe deeply and believe I'm still here. And I'm really living. That's when I knew. This journey, however long, it's one I won't walk backward. I was about to start making dinner when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. The hospital. Your mother had a fall at the grocery store. She's currently being monitored in the emergency room. I froze. My hands shook so badly I dropped the spoon onto the floor. My mom, 85 years old, living alone in San Antonio, nearly 3 hours away, needed me. But I wasn't ready. I packed quickly, called for a rental car, and hit the road. The whole drive, my mind was racing. Can I afford to support her? Will she recover? Will I need to take time off work? What if it gets worse? Who will help me care for her? The shock wasn't just about her health, but also the truth I had to face. I was still far too vulnerable when it came to emergencies. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw her lying in a hospital bed, bandages on her forehead, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and confusion. I held her hand and tried to stay calm, but inside I knew if I hadn't started preparing, if I didn't have an emergency fund or a plan, I could have been completely undone by this moment. I withdrew $1,000 from my savings to cover the initial hospital bills. It hurt, but I was grateful. Just a few months earlier, I wouldn't have even had $500 to spare. This emergency didn't pull me back to square one, but it was a wake-up call. Being financially proactive isn't just about saving, it's about anticipating the unexpected. And the older we get, the more often the unexpected shows up. I began learning about supplemental insurance for seniors, looking into long-term care support programs, and started building a second emergency fund, just for family crises. I also called my younger brother, the one I rarely talked to, and asked if we could share responsibility for Mom. It wasn't easy, but I'm learning to speak up, to ask for help. Because I know now, being independent doesn't mean doing everything alone. This crisis didn't break me. It made me sharper, more awake. And it reminded me of something important. If I truly want to move into old age with peace, I need to build myself some safety nets. My mother's crisis forced me to re-examine my entire financial plan and realize just how fragile it still was. I had made a good start. I had my first savings, a basic understanding of budgeting. But now I needed more. I needed a strategy strong enough to withstand shocks like the one I had just faced, without sending me back to square one. The first thing I did was set up 2 distinct emergency funds. One personal, meant for my own health issues, income loss, or sudden travel needs. One family, set aside for my mom or for my daughter someday if she needed help. I set up automatic transfers, $200 a month to the personal fund, $100 to the family fund. Next, I reviewed every single expense, what was a need and what was simply habit. For example, I had kept a $80 per month cable subscription, thinking I might want to watch something someday. The truth? I hadn't turned on the TV in over 6 months. I canceled it, replaced it with a $9 per month streaming service. I also shifted part of my freelance work from writing to editing and proofreading, less creative, but more consistent. It gave me a steadier income each month instead of unpredictable highs and lows. Then I began investing more seriously. I learned how to open an IRA, individual retirement account, and chose a Roth IRA since I was still in a lower income bracket and wanted to withdraw tax-free later on. I didn't contribute much, just $150 a month, but I knew time was my greatest ally. Beyond finances, I made changes to my mindset too. Each morning, I began a simple 10-minute meditation practice, just enough to ground myself in the present. I learned to accept that unexpected things would always happen, but how I respond to them was what defined my life. I also started calling my mom every evening, even after she recovered. Not just to check in, but to stay connected. Those conversations reminded me, life isn't built from your bank balance, but from the relationships you nurture day by day. After the divorce, I used to think my life was a whirlwind with no way out. But now, I was slowly rebuilding, not to become who I used to be, but to become someone stronger, more self-aware, and with a clearer sense of direction. One autumn morning, I sat on the balcony, holding a warm cup of black coffee, listening to the birds, and suddenly realized I hadn't thought about fear in over a week. No fear of being alone. No fear of running out of money. No fear of aging. I smiled, not because anything big had happened, but because I felt peaceful, naturally. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't chasing the feeling of being okay, I simply was okay. My savings account had reached $12,000. My small monthly Roth IRA investments had started earning a bit of interest, even just a few dozen dollars. But the most important gain wasn't in the numbers. It was in the confidence. I had built a system for my life: conscious spending, steady freelance income, full health insurance coverage, and 2 growing emergency funds. I no longer felt like I was just getting by, I was living intentionally, with depth and with choices. And then, something unexpected happened. I reconnected with Thomas, a friend from college who had just moved to Austin after taking early retirement from engineering. We bumped into each other at a painting class for older adults, a class I'd signed up for as a small gift to myself. At first, it was just reminiscing. Then came coffee dates. Then afternoon walks by Town Lake. Thomas had also gone through a divorce. He didn't try to fix me, and I didn't need him to. We simply understood each other. The quiet in his eyes, the old wounds that didn't need explaining. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't closed off either. Turning points don't always show up as good news or big events. Sometimes, it's simply a new way of seeing yourself. When you stop defining who you are by what you've lost, and begin living from what you still have. And what I have now is a new life, strong enough to welcome whatever comes next. Whether it's a new relationship, a new dream, or just another quiet autumn morning like today. That November, I saw David, my ex-husband, for the first time in over 6 months since the divorce was finalized. We didn't meet for emotional reasons, but for logistics, signing some final paperwork related to the house we sold in Round Rock. But strangely, it wasn't as tense as I'd imagined. David looked thinner, with more gray hair, but his eyes seemed softer. I could tell we had both come a long way. Neither of us was the same person anymore. He told me he was living in a small apartment near San Marcos, working part-time as a delivery driver for an organic food company. Not a lot of money, but he said, "I feel lighter. I drive for a few hours, come home, read, cook my own meals." It's not bad. I smiled. We used to fight about money, about lifestyle. But now, living separately, we both seemed calmer. After that meeting, I thought a lot about how we were each rebuilding. I had chosen the path of learning new skills, saving, slow, and steady investing. David chose a minimalist lifestyle, less spending, more time freedom. Both paths were valid in their own way. I started keeping better track of my monthly finances. I created spreadsheets, tracked cash flow, monitored IRA interest. The numbers were small, but they showed me I was headed in the right direction. I also tidied up my tiny apartment. Let go of old things, not just objects, but old habits. I bought a small wooden desk and placed it by the window, where I now work every morning in the soft light. Sometimes, I catch myself feeling happy simply because no one is interrupting the quiet anymore. As for David, I don't know every detail, but from a few texts, I know he's reading about personal finance, running, and after many years, finally cooking for joy, not just out of obligation. We divorced because we couldn't find harmony together. But divorce doesn't mean the end. It was the beginning of two parallel journeys of reconstruction. Slow, messy, but honest. And at some point, I truly believe this. Both David and I, each in our own way, will find peace, financial stability, and a new life that we've consciously chosen. One evening in December, the sky was cold and drizzling. I sat alone on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of hot tea, but inside, I felt colder than the weather outside. I had just finished a major freelance project, the kind of work that should have made me proud. But instead of joy, I felt a deep emptiness. A quiet but piercing question crept into my mind. Am I going to live like this forever? I'm not young anymore. At 61, most of my friends have retired, living with their partners, playing with grandchildren, or enjoying life after years of saving. And me, though more independent than I've ever been, I'm facing the future alone. That was the first time I truly felt lost. I reached for my phone, thinking about calling someone, my mom, my daughter, or Thomas, but I set it down again. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak. I didn't want to complain. Instead, I grabbed a notebook, opened to a blank page, and wrote. I poured out everything I was afraid of being sick and alone, afraid of aging with no one beside me, afraid of losing direction if I couldn't keep earning, afraid that no one would need me anymore. But then, somewhere in those messy lines of ink, something surprising appeared. I realized I still had me. I used to think divorce was the biggest loss of my life. But when I looked closer, it was that very rupture that taught me how to stand on my own, to stop depending on others, to stop fearing the loss of someone else so much that I'd lose myself in the process. I had survived the uncertain days. I had learned new skills, made money, started investing. I had rebuilt my life from the wreckage. No one did it for me. And if I've made it this far, I can keep going. That night, I didn't call anyone. I turned off the lights, pulled the blanket over me, and whispered, "Tomorrow will be better." Not because someone told me that, but because I believed it. I slept deeply that night, dreamless. And when I woke up, the soft winter sun streamed through the window, quiet and warm, like a gentle reminder. Loneliness isn't the end. It's just the stillness before a new chapter begins. One January afternoon, when the sun finally peeked out after days of gray, I decided to step outside, not for work, not out of necessity, but simply because I wanted to breathe in the fresh air. I walked to the park near my apartment, where weathered wooden benches sat beneath leafless oak trees. I brought a book and a wool scarf. I sat down, opened the book, but before I got through a page, a voice called out from behind me. "Are you a Mitch Albom fan too?" I turned around. A man about my age, salt and pepper hair, a kind smile, gestured toward the Tuesdays with Maury in my hand. I nodded, said nothing, but smiled. That's how I met Paul, a retired insurance professional who had lost his wife to illness and now lived alone with a small dog named Charlie. We didn't talk much that day, just a few exchanges about books. But the next day, when I returned to the park, he was there again. And the next day too. 3 coincidences, then a cup of coffee at a small cafe down the street. Paul didn't ask what I'd been through. He didn't pretend to have all the answers or try to console me. He just listened, nodded, and shared stories of his life in a soft, slightly humorous tone. We talked about small things, an old song, a favorite childhood dessert, tips for keeping houseplants alive. No big plans, no promises. But I felt something warm start to grow inside. One time, as we parted ways after a walk in the park, Paul turned to me and said, "You know, I didn't think I'd laugh this much at this age." I just smiled, didn't reply, but thought to myself, me neither. I don't know where this relationship is headed, but what I do know is this. Joy has returned, not loud or thrilling, but quietly, gently, like the early spring sun. And sometimes, when you've made it past the halfway point in life, peace is the most precious thing you can rediscover, often in the smallest things. One March morning, while reviewing my investment accounts, I stopped at the number, $82,400, the total in my IRA and short-term investment funds that I'd built up myself after the divorce. I sat still for a few minutes, staring at that number like it wasn't real. Less than 3 years ago, my accounts were nearly empty. I had lost almost everything in the asset split, plus taken on credit card debt and moving expenses. But now, while that number isn't enough to retire on, it represents something far more powerful, the control I had reclaimed over my life. I no longer spent money on things that didn't matter. Every month, I stuck to a budget, invested at least 50% of my freelance income, and allocated 10% to my emergency fund. Simple habits, cooking at home, reusing what I had, using a cashback credit card all helped me build this life back up. Around that same time, I got a message from David. He said he had finished paying off his car loan, saved nearly $60,000, and started investing in mutual funds with stable returns. He still lived simply, morning delivery runs, afternoon workouts, and studying finance on the side. We were no longer husband and wife, but from time to time, we shared updates like old friends, no resentment, no regrets. David used to be stubborn, traditional, uninterested in saving or investing. And I used to depend on his income, never even thinking about financial independence. And yet here we were, both walking our own independent paths now, in our own ways, but moving forward just the same. What moved me the most wasn't the number in my account. It was the feeling that I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Even living alone, with no one to fall back on, I was okay. And I knew that sense of stability didn't come from luck or magic, it came from small, consistent choices made every single day. That day, I made a cup of tea, sat out on the balcony, and watched the sun rise, my heart as light as the clouds. For the first time in years, I felt, I won't just survive, I'm going to thrive. A few years ago, I was in a video project. Now, that same client reached out. He wanted to expand his coaching program for older adults, especially women over 50 who were trying to re-enter the workforce. The email read, "Linda, I remember how powerfully you shared your journey of rebuilding life after divorce. Have you ever thought about teaching what you've learned? I think there are a lot of people who need it." I read it over and over. On one hand, I felt excited. This was a chance to share, to help others going through what I once did. But on the other hand, I was scared. I'm not a financial expert. I'm just a woman who failed at marriage, got lost, and slowly picked up the pieces to rebuild her life. Who would listen to me? Who would believe me? I almost ignored the email. But then I remembered the nights I cried alone in a small rented room, the first time in my life with no one beside me. I remembered the panic of seeing my bank account down to a few $100s. And I remembered this one thing clearly. If, in that moment, someone had said to me, "You'll get through this. Here's how I did it," I would have felt so much less afraid. That evening, I called Paul and told him everything. He simply said, "Linda, you lived it. You don't need to be anyone else. Just be yourself and speak the truth." 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a camera for the first time, nervous, unsure, and started recording my first video. Starting over at 60, it's not too late. I didn't know how many people would watch it. I didn't know if it would succeed. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't hiding anymore. When I uploaded that video, I opened a new door, not just for others, but for myself. A door to connection, to meaning, and to a sense of belonging I thought I had lost forever. That fall, I took a walk with Paul in the little park where we first met. The leaves had turned crimson and gold, the air was crisp, and with every slow step, I felt a quiet peace settle inside me. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. Between us was a kind of silence only shared by two people who deeply understand each other. I told him my third video had just been reposted by an organization supporting older women rejoining the workforce. Nearly 1,000 views. A few comments from women in their 50s and 60s. They said they felt seen, heard. Paul smiled and nodded. "I think you've found your life's work," he said. And I believed him. Not a big career, not fame or fortune, just something meaningful at a stage in life when most people assume it's too late to begin again. As for David, we still stay in touch, though not often. One Thanksgiving, he sent me a photo, he and our daughter rebuilding a small wooden cabin in the Colorado mountains. He said he'd learned carpentry, started growing organic vegetables, and spent full days without checking his phone. For the first time in years, he wrote, "I feel free." I couldn't help but smile. My David, the one who used to live for offices, spreadsheets, and tightly packed calendars, now rediscovering himself in nature with his own two hands. We didn't get back together, but both of us have come to a peaceful place in our own ways. And that's enough. Happiness at 64 doesn't look like it did at 30. It's not loud or flashy. It's a quiet afternoon, a surprise message, a warm cup of tea on a cold day. It's knowing who you are, making peace with the past, and still believing in what lies ahead. I used to think I'd end my life as someone left behind. But it turns out, my life was simply turning the page to a new chapter. I used to be terrified of the phrase, retiring alone. After more than 30 years of marriage, the idea of living without a partner felt like a void. But now, when I look back at the journey I've taken, I don't feel alone. I see a woman who has learned how to stand tall, how to be confident, and how to live her own life, not the life someone else expected of her. Our marriage didn't fail. It simply finished its purpose. It gave me memories, a beautiful daughter, and hard-won lessons. Most importantly, it forced me, through pain, to face the truth. No one is coming to save you. You have to save yourself. David isn't the same man I once knew, and that's a good thing. In a recent video call, he said something that stuck with me. I used to think retirement was the end. Now I see it's when you start living for real. He didn't say it outright, but I know the change didn't come from a cabin or from money. It came from letting go of his old self and choosing to live more simply, more honestly. And the same goes for me. I've stopped chasing perfection. I've accepted the wrinkles on my face, the silver in my hair, and the days when I don't feel like doing much. But I've also learned to love myself for everything that's still standing after the cracks. I'm no longer afraid of aging. I'm no longer afraid of being alone, because I know I've weathered the storm, and I'm still here more whole than ever. If someone reading this sees themselves in these words, lost in divorce, aging, or an uncertain future, I just want to say, you are not at the end. You're at the beginning. I started over at 60, and if I could do it, so can you. If there's one thing I wish I had learned earlier, it's this. Financial freedom isn't just about money, it's about feeling in control of your life. Back when I was married, I left everything financial to David. I didn't budget, I didn't invest, and I didn't have a personal account that was truly mine. I thought love and trust were enough. But when divorce came out of nowhere, I realized the only person who would be with me to the very end was me. After my divorce, the first lesson I learned was this. Understand your own cash flow. I started tracking every single dollar I spent, learned how to save, opened my own retirement account, and explored investment options that made sense for someone my age. The second lesson: you're never too old to begin again. At 60, I learned how to make videos, develop soft skills, talk to a camera, and turn my life experiences into something meaningful for others. I stopped thinking of retirement the old way and started seeing it as a transition, a new phase, one without a boss, without obligations, but full of purpose. Third, wealth doesn't always mean having more, it means having enough and feeling at peace. David lives simply now. So do I. We no longer shop to fill a void. We don't need to prove anything. We spend money on experiences, on our health, and on peace of mind. Things that, back then, even with money, we didn't always have. And finally, the most important lesson of all: no loss is the end of the road, as long as you have the courage to keep going. I lost a marriage, but I found myself. David lost the structure of our old family, but he found a sense of calm he hadn't known in over 30 years of working. We didn't succeed by society's standards, but we didn't give up. We chose to live honestly. We chose happiness on our own terms. So, if you're approaching 60 and feeling lost, I want you to remember this. You're not late. You're just finally ready. Are you 55? 60? Recently divorced? Feeling unsure? Or just realizing your life no longer looks like it used to? I get it. That feeling of waking up one morning and wondering, who am I now that I'm no longer someone's wife? Without a job? Without a clear plan? But I'm here to tell you, the moment that feels like your greatest loss might just be your greatest beginning. You don't have to start big. I started with a notebook to track my expenses. One simple video. One early morning, waking up 30 minutes earlier to learn how to edit clips. And those little steps opened up an entirely new world. You can relearn how to manage your finances. You can rebuild a life of independence. And if your heart is still open, you can love again. Start today. Green Circle, open your own savings account. Green Circle, write down every expense this week. Green Circle, ask yourself, if I live truly for me, what would I want to do? And if you're feeling lost, leave a comment. Share your story. I, and many others like me, will be here to listen. Starting over at 60 is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of, because you chose yourself. And that journey deserves to be lived fully. Backhand index pointing height, have you faced a turning point in midlife? Backhand index pointing height, have you ever thought you were out of chances? Share below, because your story might inspire someone who's ready to give up. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because we, grown-ups, still have so much more to live for, to learn, and to love. This new chapter is only just beginning.